And now it's time for Shelf Life, news from the Whitchurch-Stouffville Public Library, with your host, Librarian Catherine Sword.
Hello, everyone, and today I'm speaking with local author Jennifer Dance, who's written a book called Red Wolf, and I had the opportunity to read an advance copy, and I would have thought adult, young adult, but Jennifer, you were telling me that it's actually being promoted as a different age. Tell us a little bit about that.
Publishers have to put a book into a genre, unfortunately, because I would have preferred this book to have been open-ended. Anybody should read it. All of Canada should read it. It's a Canadian story. But when I wrote it, I was thinking more in terms of children who were perhaps 12 and up.
Okay.
But so the publisher decided that 9 was about the age. So they're saying 9 to 13, but I still think that it should be read by parents of 9 to 13-year-olds and grandparents of 9 to 13-year-olds too.
To read with them even.
Yes.
Yes, because it's an interesting topic. Do you want to give us a quick idea of what the topic is, and then we'll have an actual reading?
Well, the main topic is residential schools, Indian residential schools in Canada. At one level, it's the story of an orphaned wolf and a First Nations boy who raises him. But on another level, it's about the Indian Act of 1876 and the residential school system that grew out of that. And on the deepest level, it's about the impact that Europeans have had on both wolves and the original people of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tackles quite the topic. And I think maybe we will jump into the reading sooner, as in now, and let listeners find out a little bit about your characters.
The young wolf followed the child and his father for 5 days, his pads falling softly on the narrow trail. But when the forest ended and the track headed diagonally across a meadow, he would go no further. He needed to feel the protection of the trees. Open spaces made him anxious. So he sat on his haunches, just within the tree line, one ear pricked to the sky, the other folded in half, his amber eyes following the 2 uprights. The little one ran back to him and buried a wet face into his ruff, but the soothing feeling was not there. The tall upright took the little one by the hand and led him into the gentle waves of sun-bleached grass. Crooked Ear trembled and whined, wanting to follow, but the feral part of his nature kept him rooted. The little upright vanished first, then the tall one disappeared. Their scent hung on the air, and Crooked Ear raised his nostrils to the breeze and inhaled. Then he sat back on his haunches and waited. Red Wolf clutched his father's hand. In silence they walked the last few miles, their pace slowing until some 10 feet from the gate they stopped. "I'm frightened," Red Wolf whispered. Man and boy stared through the iron bars of the gate to the large building that stood in a grassy clearing. It was like nothing they had ever seen, big, solid and symmetrical, with 3 rows of barred windows, neatly stacked, one on top of the other. "I don't want to go to school," Red Wolf said, gazing without comprehension at the mandate etched over the main doorway, to rescue the heathens from their evil ways and integrate them into Christian society. "We have no choice," his father replied. "It is the white man's law. You must learn their ways. It's the only hope for the people." The boy's chin quivered. "I want to go home," he said, the back of his hand quickly wiping a tear from his cheek. Tears stung He Who Whistle's eyes too, but he would not allow them to fall. "It will be exciting for you," he said, forcing a smile. "Like going to summer camp. You will have new friends to play with." Red Wolf remembered how he had felt each spring when the family left their small camp on the beach at Clear Lake and made the annual migration to the larger summer camp on the northern forest. It was exciting to pack the entire contents of their home into canoes and paddle for days across lakes and up rivers, sleeping under the stars and waking to the call of loons. He wished he were back in the canoe now, trailing a hand in the clear water, watching his father's muscular shoulders, listening to the quiet dip of the paddle, the slap of a hand on a mosquito or the rasp of fingernails on bitten flesh. He remembered how eager he had been to sleep in the new summer wigwam, even though it was identical to the winter one, right down to the mats, the furs, and the birch bark containers that they brought along. But he didn't feel any excitement now, only apprehension and gut-wrenching sadness. "Soon you will understand the white man's signs, just as you understand the signs of the animals," He Who Whistles said, "and then you will make the marks and send them to me." The child lowered his head and stared at his feet, working the toe of his elk-hide moccasin into the dusty surface of the laneway. "But how will you understand the marks, Father?" The sound of a key turning in a lock brought father and son back to the world around them. They looked through the iron bars of the gate directly into the round face of a man who had not one hair on his head. "You're late, very late, days late," the man said in stilted Algonquin. "Hurry." He opened the gate and yanked the child through, slamming the bars in the face of he who whistles and turning the key with a loud clunk. "I must see where he will be," he who whistles demanded. "His mother, she must know." "Come back at the end of June," the man shouted, dragging the child toward the building. "June?" he who whistles said. "When the sun is high in the sky," the man explained, "when the days are long, and get out of here right now or I'll set the dog on you." Red Wolf dug in his heels and used all of his strength to resist the force of the big man who was taking him from his father. Impatient with the slow progress, the man gripped the boy's ear and lifted him to his toes. Red Wolf squealed and lashed out blindly with his fists. The man let him go and doubled over, and Red Wolf dashed toward his father, throwing himself against the locked gate, scrambling to get a foothold, trying to climb up and over. He who whistles pointed to the top of the tall gate, where barbed wire lay coiled like a sleeping snake. "The wire has teeth. It will eat your flesh." But Red Wolf continued scrambling upward. He was inches from the top when the man's powerful arms grabbed him, jerked him away from the gate, and carried him through the school door. He fought to look back at his father. He who whistles had sunk to his knees and was wailing. The school door slammed shut. "Listen well," the man growled, tossing Red Wolf against the wall as if he had no more weight than a leaf. "I can make your life very uncomfortable, or we can be friends. See, it all depends on how you behave. Understand?" Before he could respond, Red Wolf was shoved into the wall a second time. He gasped, struggling to breathe. "As far as I'm concerned, you're a worthless Indian. And it's a waste of everybody's time trying to educate you, civilize you, and integrate you. You'll never be anything but a filthy savage." A glob of the man's saliva fell on Red Wolf's shin. It crept along the slope of his foot towards the porcupine quills that his mother had sewn on his moccasin. He watched as though all of this was happening to a different child, a different foot, a different moccasin. The man released his grip and stepped back a pace, wagging a finger vigorously in the air and barking strange words. Red Wolf struggled to focus on the tip of the finger that was moving closer and closer to his face, and then it happened. He felt himself stretching upward, growing taller and thinner until he was looking down on the man's bald head. He saw sweat gleaming there. He floated peacefully. Beneath him, the man's meaty fist engulfed the fragile hand of a small boy, a boy whose eyes were wide with fear. Red Wolf noticed the whiskers that sprouted from the man's ears. They were the colour of autumn leaves, and he thought it strange that Mr. Hall had orange hair on his ears, but none on his head. He wondered if the hair of the whiteskins changed colour in the autumn and fell from their heads, like the leaves fall from the trees. The man's demeanour softened, his mouth stretching into a grin. "But if you behave yourself, you'll be just fine." Red Wolf slid back into his own moccasins, but he felt no reassurance from the man's words and no comfort from the man's smile. The grey-blue eyes did not twinkle with warmth and kindness like those of the people. And as Mr. Hall led him along the corridor, he felt something he had never felt before: dread.
That's a great start for our listeners, and I'd like to just address the audience level again, just briefly. As a librarian, I would be advising parents that because it's a topic of the residential school, they might want to read this first so that they have an idea of what their child's reading. Now, having said that, warning, Jennifer, you've done a beautiful job at bringing this into a level that is approachable for young people. It's a tough story, it's a tough topic, and yet you don't get into the gore. It's really approachable for young people. Can you talk a little bit about how tough it was to write for a younger audience in mind?
I worked quite hard at it. I really wanted it to be read by everybody, and so I worked at making it work on different levels. So it's an adventure story at the basic level between a boy and a wolf that a young child could read or have it read to, and they would see it as that. But then older children or adults can see between the lines or, grasp the nuances that are there. And there's some irony in it, and there are things that older people, mature people would understand that younger people wouldn't.
That's right. That's right. And I think you're right. It does appeal to adults and that 9-year-old throat. Now, I'm curious about The Boy and the Wolf. Why did you have a second character, a second storyline as a wolf?
Oh, I thought that was a brilliant idea.
Well, yeah, it is, but
when I realized that there was this similarity between wolves in the wild and the original people, because historically wolves and the people were both at the top of the food chain, yet they didn't prey on each other. They weren't enemies. In North America, they lived side by side, and they both lived in strong family groups, with the elders teaching the young ones how to be functioning members of society. When the Europeans came, they brought a different idea, because in Europe the wolves were hated. The myth that they killed humans had become established as truth. And so when the Europeans came, they brought that mindset with them, and they put native people into the same category as wolves. They were both savage, they were both dangerous, they both needed to be driven off the land, killed or at least tamed. They had to be gotten rid of. They were in the way. And as an animal lover, I could see that wolves had had a bad rap.
Yeah.
And suddenly I realized that I could tell part of the boy's story through the wolf. And also, people who would never willingly read a book about a residential school might very well read a story about a wolf. And so I thought that I could use that to get my readership going on it.
Wolf.
A boy and a wolf, yes.
And the naming of the two characters, I mean, it took me a while to realize that Red Wolf, the title, wasn't the wolf.
That's right. Red Wolf is the boy. Mishka Mengun, it translates into Red Wolf. And the wolf is called Crocodile, but he is a reddish-coloured timber wolf. And so the analogy goes right through the story, from the title and the requiem at the beginning, which can be spoken by either, and the analogies of the boy and the wolf going right through.
They do. They work well. They're good storylines. I was as happy to get to the chapter about the wolf as I was to get back to the chapter about the boy. So they were really good. Now, the librarian in me also wants to know a little bit about the research that you did. And where did you get the native language? What else did you need to research to write this book?
Well, the historical research wasn't a problem, and it's all there. The experiential stuff came mostly from about 12 years ago. My eldest daughter married a First Nations man, and they welcomed me into their family. And when I told them about this idea that I had been working on for the longest while, they really encouraged me. And so they shared not just their experience, but things that they had heard of other people. So it was a conglomeration of all of that.
So you've done a little bit of research from a library and books, probably, and yet you've also been able to interview some live persons who have had probably personal experiences.
And then there was an Anishinaabe woman who I had never met before, who magically just came alongside me and helped me with the language to make sure that everything was correct on that, and the culture as well. So yeah, the native people who have surrounded me in this have been very supportive.
Nice. Now, of course, there's one more native person that we've got to tell our listeners, because there's a lovely quote on the front cover. Can you give us the quote and tell us a little bit about how you got that?
Indeed, I can. The quote is from Joseph Boyden. And I've actually, although I have it written down here, I have it learned in my head. It's just emblazoned into my head. So on the front cover it says, "With Red Wolf, Jennifer Dance has come howling out of the wilderness, and I am deeply impressed."
Oh, that's amazing.
People are saying, how did you get that? How did you get that? Well, believe it or not, I found him on Facebook. And I messaged him, and to begin with, he didn't get back to me, but I tried again, and then he did. And we had a few messages back and forward, and he said, send me a copy.
Wonderful.
Hey.
Wonderful. That's just great. We'll be right back after the break with Jennifer Dance and her book, Red Wolf.